I actually had a conversation with Hillary Clinton when Barack was running. I had decided I was going to support Barack because he called me up and I had supported him for senator. I hung up the phone.
Because you were a Hillary supporter before that.
Right.
Yeah.
I hung up the phone and I said, oh, how am I going to explain this to Hillary?
Right.
Because I have been a Hillary supporter.
Right. But after my meditation and my scripture, the last part of the scripture had hope and joy.
Hope and joy.
And I immediately felt better. And then I was like, that's what we'll start off with.
Okay.
So guess who's in my chair today? Debra Lee. My good friend Debra Lee. We met each other at the beginning of your hair journey.
Correct.
Not your natural hair journey.
That's right.
But I don't know whether to ask you to tell me about your hair journey or how you came to go natural.
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah.
And talking to you, which I do all the time anyway, but nice to do it under these circumstances. Let me just say, when I was growing up, I had very thick, long hair.
Right.
People used to tell me I had enough hair for 3 people. And
I can see that, your daughter, and you share the similar texture.
Right. And so my mother, when we lived in California, we lived in Compton a couple of years. She went to beauty school. I think she mainly wanted to be a manicurist, pedicurist, but she learned all about hair.
I forgot you left, your dad and your family left California. Because I was reading your book for the second time.
Thank you.
And but you left after the Watts riots.
That's correct.
That's crazy to me.
My dad was in Korea, and my mom took us to California, to Compton, from D.C. And
from DC, okay.
We learned out later that they had kind of broken up. And D.C. was my dad's home, so she didn't want to stay there. And she had a half sister in Compton, so we moved to Compton. Took the train all the way across country. And but the important part for this discussion is she learned about relaxers very early on.
When?
In the late 60s.
Really?
Yes. And so because I had so much hair, what's the first thing she did? She put a Revlon Super on my hair.
Oh, Revlon is really classic.
Yes.
Yes.
Super. And she would leave it on for 45 minutes.
I loved Super. I did Super.
It was all right the first 30 minutes.
Yeah.
The last 15, I wanted to jump out the window.
No.
Before relaxer, she used to press my hair.
Right.
So relaxer was kind of a relief, but I think she left it on much too long. But that's what they suggested. And she kept saying, "You want your hair straight, don't you? Don't complain. You want your hair straight, don't you?" And so I'd sit there with my scalp burning. And then we moved. We left after the Watts riots. My dad came back. My parents got back together, and we moved to Greensboro, North Carolina.
That's not a migration to the west or the north.
No,
that's a reverse.
It's a reverse migration,
which is what Charles Blow advocates for now, right?
Yes, right. And we did that because my father's sister, was married to a guy who was formerly an Ohio State star football player, and he was coaching football at A&T, a historically black college. And they told my father if he moved to Greensboro, he could finish his education, college education, because he had never done that before he went to the Army. He could finish, and we could live in a dorm. He could be a house father, and the family could live in the dorm. My sister was going to Michigan State, so it was just my brother and me. So we moved to North Carolina under the thought that my dad would go back to college and we would live in a dorm. Well, we got there, we looked at the dorm, and it was horrible, too small, and so we moved off campus to a project, Cumberland Courts in Greensboro. Anyway, my dad never finished his college education. I don't know what happened with A&T, but he went and started working. And this was the Black Power days.
Yeah.
67 maybe.
65?
Yeah, I don't know. I was in the 6th grade. But the town was very segregated.
Right.
And I went to all black school for first time.
Yes.
Elementary school, then middle, then what they called junior high, then high school, all black. And that was a rude awakening for me. Well, I won't call it rude. It was an awakening. I think I found my better self under that
You did,
system.
and well, you told me that a while ago, but it wasn't until reading your book, I Am Debra Lee, for the second time I'm reading it.
Yay.
Is that, because it is a read, and I it's funny because you're this next stage after BET.
Yeah.
You have you took Leading Women Defined, and it is a safe place for black women and executives in every sector to empower them. And I'm usually one of a few guys in that space, and I oftentimes will leave. But I say all that to say is that, like BET, in the book, people really get your commitment to black people.
Right.
And you don't understand that unless you understand what being raised in what we, the rest of the country, might have not understood, that segregated black schools were not a bad thing. Being raised in a community where the teachers were black, the doctors were black. It's just like
everyone was black.
I mean, can we get back to that?
We didn't want for anything.
Exactly.
Because we had it all on our side of town.
Right.
Now in Greensboro, we were very lucky because there was a developer who built a community, a very middle class to upper class neighborhood for black professionals. So we had nice housing, brick houses, all the doctors and lawyers lived in that neighborhood. My dad liked to joke we had the least expensive house in the neighborhood. He paid $19,000 for our house. But looking back on it, it was a beautiful neighborhood, modern houses. And but anyway, so we used to have Save the Black School days.
Right.
Because we didn't want to integrate. And we believed in separate but equal.
Right.
That if you just give us the resources the white schools have, we'll be okay.
We'll be fine.
Because our teachers care about us, our ministers, our parents, everyone in our community is going to make sure we do well.
Which is almost identical to the fight that you had within BET, taking it from Bob, which was the painted black.
Right.
Like, nah.
Yeah.
We can be just as good without just... And that's the interesting thing, even looking at the election and how black people are so many different things. And you got to love all of us.
Right. Right.
And you have to love every level of us.
Yeah.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
That's true.
And I don't think we oftentimes love all of us that way. I do.
Yeah. I try. I
I
was raised to love us.
Right. And
whether you were homeless, whether you were a janitor, my dad used to say to me, the people are no better than the folks.
Right.
Which to me meant you treat everybody the same. And he would bend down and give money to homeless people. He would shake the janitor's hand and do the Black Power handshake. He always,
to everybody.
He thought he was really cool.
Right.
Even though he had been in the Army for 23 years. But he always said, the people are no better than the folks. But I knew there was expectations of me as his daughter, as someone born during the year Brown versus Board of Education was decided to get the best. 1954.
Okay.
And don't do the math to see how old I am.
Yeah.
But, it was the first time we could go to any school we wanted to.
Right.
At the time, it didn't mean anything to me, but my dad pushed me. I went to Ivy League school. I saw what I was exposed to. And over time, I saw we were a little, pie in the sky. That if we could save our black schools, we would be all right. Because they were still going to treat us different. And you look at how we got our first black president, Barack Obama, and his wife, Michelle Obama, and they went to the best schools they could. And now if they had gone to Jackson State and some of the HBCUs, would they have given them credit for that? Or did they say, Barack went to Harvard Law School, he went to Columbia undergrad, Michelle went to Princeton and Harvard. And do you know, it's interesting, the year he was elected was exactly 54 years from the year Brown versus Board of Education was decided.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I think if the court knew we would, advance that quickly, they may have had second thoughts about it. But it was literally 24 years, 2008.
Well, it's funny because you almost wish that our struggle was, I think there's a generation that missed that struggle and tend to think that it was a little bit too historical.
Yeah, and it wasn't. It was just yesterday.
You need to know.
Right.
So I'll tell you a little story. I think I may have told you before, but I think we had transitioned already. So I think your hair had grown out from the short cut.
Yeah. I got away from my hair, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. But we can always go back.
Yeah.
Because hair is a big part of Black people in their journey.
Right, and my identity.
And your identity.
As it developed.
Yeah, you're right. Because you didn't go through all those years at BET and corporate. It's interesting because your CEO role was where you really flourished with your natural hair, and I don't know the impact that understand that you had to the women that came into the salon.
Yeah, that's amazing to me.
Yes, and
I love it.
I know you do. You told me one time, and I tell a lot of my clients to this day that are discovering their natural hair. I was like, you said, it is really nice to have discovered something that you love about yourself later on in life. Yeah. And I was like, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because we all need to find something.
Right.
Here and there.
Yes, that's true. But I have to say that in high school I had an afro out to here.
And your dad was like,
you look like Angela Davis, and they're gonna pick you up on the street.
Right, because that was
at the time she was on the run.
Yeah, she was on the run,
and I was so proud that I looked like her. That's
cool.
That was the look I was going for.
Right.
I didn't want to be. I didn't want to be arrested, but that was the look.
I heard that. Yeah.
But it was so big, and I was so skinny. It looked like I was gonna fall over. But I was proud. You could look at my senior yearbook, and you see me all over that book with hair out to here.
Right.
But it wasn't my natural hair. And so then when I went to college, I got it cut shorter. I had a small afro, but it still wasn't totally my natural hair because I never was patient enough to let it all grow out. I mean, to grow out the relaxer.
Oh,
so
okay.
I would go back and forth. But you'll see some pictures of me in the 70s when I was in law school where I had short hair, and then you'll see some where I had long straight hair. Because I would go back and forth, and I was still,
Were you in law school at Brown or Harvard?
I was at law school at Harvard.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And that's when you cut your hair short?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But then I let it grow out, and I think that was the atmosphere at Harvard Law. You got to be corporate, you got to go to a law firm.
Right.
But
you didn't relax it, you cut it short.
Yeah, we ain't doing froze anymore. No, I relaxed it.
Oh, okay.
And wore it long for a while. I have a photo I can show you.
No, remember that short natural? It was called a natural, not an afro.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. But I don't think it was all natural. I mean, I had to wash it every day to get it curly. Bottom line, I went back and forth.
Right.
Until I met
And that's
you.
okay, yeah.
And I wanted to go the full transition.
Right. When I was talking about this generation and how they think that things happened so long ago, and it really didn't. And it's really, you have to understand context to understand this. I remember it was a studio museum thing that they were honoring. And I say this as a reference to you saying when you were going to Harvard. And I think Josie Thomas, Deborah Wright was here.
I remember that.
I think you had just got up from my chair, and Anna DeVere Smith had come in. And Anna sat down. She says, "Oh, you just do everybody." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Debra Lee." She says, "You need to know who she is," like an auntie, right? I got her auntie. That's my sister, right? You're my sister, my auntie. She said, "You need to know who she is." Yeah. She sits in a boardroom as a Black woman where most women have never sat. And I was like,
that's so great.
Right. And so I say that to say that that's where community comes in. Because there was a limited few of you, of Black women, Black men, that were in those spaces. Right. Ivy League colleges. Right. And you know one another. Right. Like we did History Makers. Like to see all of those Black men and women who all knew one another. Right. it reminds me of when busing happened to our high schools
Right.
in 79 and 80. We were bused out to white schools.
Yeah.
And
I was going to ask you about how you grew up.
there were a bunch of, all the white schools were outside the hood. Seattle did have a hood, and it was a black community. It was called the Central District.
Oh, really?
And it was sandwiched between downtown Seattle and Lake Washington, which was an affluent white area. And so it was diverse by geography, which probably gave it that kind of fake liberal, Seattle, that fake liberal kind of stance.
Yeah.
But my uncle said when they got there in the early 60s that he was like, white people barricaded Madison Avenue, like, y'all ain't coming down here.
Oh, really?
Because, Seattle also went on to become the highest rate of interracial couples.
Yeah.
Up until 67, it was illegal. Seattle was the only legal place where interracial couples could be married. Yeah.
Right. You're a product of
I'm a product of that.
Interracial.
Yeah, my grandparents were sharecroppers, and back in the day, in order to leave the house, you had to either get married or you could follow a sibling who got married. And my aunt married a guy in the service, because otherwise you had to stay and pick cotton.
Oh, wow.
Right? Yeah. And so my aunt married a guy in the service. He got stationed in Bremerton, Washington. So somehow my two uncles followed them there because some of them went to Arizona. That was their migration.
Oh, okay.
And so I was only down to me like some years ago. I was like, oh, my dad must have been buck wild when he realized not only could he talk to a white woman, but he had relations with her.
Yeah. Wow.
So
when you were in school, at your youngest, you were in Seattle?
In Seattle, yeah.
And,
I'm first generation Seattle.
Right. So were those schools integrated at all, or were they segregated? No. And then you took a bus to white school.
We took a bus to white school.
Did they call that freedom of choice?
I don't know.
That's what we called it in Greensboro.
Really?
Freedom of choice meant that a few black students were bold enough to get on a bus and go to the white school.
Oh, okay.
It didn't mean anything about white students coming to the black school.
No, and that's in when I read I Am Debra Lee in your book, the white kids came to the black schools. How does that?
Much later. The year I graduated, which was 1972, they implemented forced busing. Now, how long, Brown versus Board of Education was 1954. It took to 1972 for that to hit Greensboro and say, you all have to go to a black school. Before that, it was what they call freedom of choice. And it meant 3 or 4 black students would go to a school and suffer through whatever they, and no one.
We see the pictures, and I mean that's a brutal choice.
Yeah,
but it's a brave.
Right. Now, no one made them.
Courageous choice.
No one made them.
Right.
Usually, they had educated parents who were like, "Okay, this is a good opportunity for you."
Okay, so that's why there was the courageousness of not only the children but the parents to like, no, you're going to go to their schools.
Right. And Sherry, my friend from Greensboro, and Gwen, my friend from Greensboro, they went to the white school. There were 4 high schools in Greensboro, 1 black and 3 white. And they, their family made the choice. Now, her dad was a doctor. Right. And, I've never heard them talk about how bad it was. But I have to believe, get her on the podcast and ask, because I have to believe there were situations that were uncomfortable.
Right.
Because, the white students weren't, and teachers weren't welcoming them.
Well, Gwen ain't getting on camera. She told me she's in the witness protection program. I said, I'm not asking you to do anything.
That's so funny. That is too funny.
But
another funny story about my hair journey. I went to Belk department store in Greensboro to get a job. My sister was in jewelry in New York, and I always liked jewelry, so I applied for a job at Belk department store. I didn't know until years later I was the first black person to work out on the counter. But when I went in, I had my big fro.
When was your sister get to New York? When did your sister get to New York?
When? Oh, a long time. When we moved to Greensboro, she went to Michigan State.
Oh, okay.
And when she left Michigan State, she moved to New York.
Oh, she'd been here for a minute.
Yeah, a long time.
Not in
Started out as a buyer for Bloomingdale's, and then got into jewelry and some other things. So she had she majored in home economics in college, but that took her into fashion.
Yeah.
So I wanted a job in retail. I went in, I had my big fro, and the woman must have liked me because she said, "Is there another way you can wear your hair?" And I knew exactly what she meant.
Right.
And I said, yes, there is. She said, well, then you can start on blah, blah, blah. And I went home and got my hair straight again.
Okay.
And I guess they thought maybe with straight hair I didn't look black.
Yeah.
And I would blend in.
Yeah.
Now, there was a woman that worked for Flory Roberts at the counter across from the jewelry counter, and she was very dark skinned. But that's why I didn't know I was the first black employee. But she worked for Flory Roberts. She didn't work for Belk. So when my friend inducted me to the Civil Rights Museum in Greensboro, she said that I was the first black person that worked at Belk. And I guess they thought I was flexible because I agreed to change my hair. But the funny thing about working there, the Woolworths, where the Civil Rights Museum now is, was across the street. And I used to eat lunch there every day. They had good food.
They did have
and
good
that's
food.
where
The
the
counter was
sit-in,
great, yeah.
the sit-in in Greensboro was at that Woolworths.
Oh, it was?
And part of it is in the African American Museum.
Oh, okay,
When
the
you
one
go,
in D.C.
Yeah, you can go in and sit at that counter. But anyway, so I moved to Greensboro after the sit-in, but it's still hung in the air. It's still, wow, we had one of the biggest. It was 4 A&T students who would not get up and sat there for days.
When busing started in Seattle, 79 and 80, we were bused out to those high schools. There was a fresh cross burning on our campus.
Right.
And people think that happened so long ago. That was in 1980.
Right. Wow.
In Seattle, in the North End.
1980.
Yes.
That's the year I graduated from law school.
And that's when I first heard the term corn-fed. Because the white boys out there were, they were rough.
So were you scared to go to school?
No, because I had a new brother. My dad got married.
Yeah.
So I was 15. My brother was 6. My new brother was 16.
Oh, okay.
And he was a football superstar.
Oh, okay.
And he was a good-looking guy. And the girls loved him. Yeah. And I had my younger brother is 10 years younger than me. And so, and he and my dad and his mom split up when they split up. When I was about 13 and my brother was 10. Not 13. He was 8. He was hurt that my dad and I left him. But I don't you go with your mom and I go with my dad. That's how it works. You don't have any control over that. But it hurt both of us. But I say all that to say that all of the black kids in the 4 or 5 white schools that we were all bussed out to from the black community, we knew those other kids at those other schools.
Oh, yeah, of course you did.
And of course, when you get a new brother who's a year older than you become way more rambunctious than you were.
Alone.
So I'm like, if you getting a whooping, I'm getting a whooping.
Right.
Or if you getting in trouble or suspended, I'm telling my brother was there.
Right.
So we're both getting suspended.
Right.
But we
and he protected you from.
Actually, he protected me. That's when my dad stopped beating me.
Oh.
And I don't know, maybe I don't know why, but he did. I don't know, maybe he thought I was too old to be beat like a slave anymore.
Yeah.
In front of this new family.
Yeah.
But thank God that stopped.
But did he protect you at school too? From the white kids? Your brother?
It wasn't.
Wasn't that bad?
Nah, they wasn't messing with us.
Okay.
And that's what I'm saying. The black kids are stuck together like we are not our ancestors. You try it.
Right.
So none of that. There was tension, but we stayed with us and they stayed with them. And if we did integrate, it was also the beginning of something where integration is not a bad thing, I guess, when you start to. But we all went back to our respective communities.
Well, my dad, as I said, was very much believer in education, so he pushed me to go to Ivy League school.
Oh, he did.
Which the kids at my black high school were like, "You going where?" Because they all went to either A&T, Chapel Hill, and Duke. If you were brilliant. So they were like, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "I'm going to Providence, Rhode Island." Where is that? And so, and that was 1972. So things were changing, but they hadn't changed that much. Yeah. And my aunt, my dad's other sister, went to Mount Holyoke in the 40s. because she went to Dunbar High School in D.C., which is very prestigious black high school. And they had teachers who were PhDs. And during those years, a few black students slipped through. And my aunt was like one of 3 students at Mount Holyoke. So my dad knew about those colleges and wanted me to do that. And then I get to Brown, and it's almost as militant as my high school is.
Oh, really?
Because, you know, the black students didn't mix with the white students.
Yeah.
We refused to take our trays after dinner, because we're like, wait, we just lived through 200 years of slavery.
Yeah.
We're going to leave our trays right here, and somebody else is going to pick them up.
Oh, you were expected to?
Yeah, like any time you have a tray,
Yeah.
when you finish, you're supposed to go put it on a
Right.
thing. We refused. Which was the stupidest thing in retrospect, because one, the trays built up
Right.
on the tables, and after a while, no one else could sit there. 2, most of the people that worked in the kitchen were black students,
Right.
so we were just making it harder for them. But we were so convinced
Right.
that was our little
Look,
protest.
this shit was fresh then,
Right.
too. It was all really fresh.
And I had a white roommate. I said, do not speak to me outside of this room. I mean,
so
I
you were
really,
real militant.
and you could do that at Brown. You could go there and just have black friends. And then sophomore year,
wow.
you got your black
Okay.
roommate. You know, freshman year, you had to go with what the school gave you.
Yeah.
And my silly roommate, her name is Maureen, she would still come up to the black table and just stand there. I'm like, what are you doing? I told you not to speak to me.
Oh, so y'all was kind of hardcore. Well, you had to be.
It was 72.
Yeah.
They were just letting us in.
Wow.
And just in enough numbers that you had.
What was affirmative action?
I guess it depends on what segment of the world. Are you talking about education or business? But I think in the 60s into the 70s is when it started becoming popular.
Right. And was affirmative action, forgive me for being ignorant, was affirmative action for black people?
Was it for black people?
Yeah.
Yes.
Particularly.
Yes.
And so when they say white women have benefited from it, what do they mean by that?
The set-asides and
I
the
see.
preferences they gave to African Americans oftentimes also applied to women.
Oh, okay.
Because
I
they
see.
treated them as a
Of course, race and sex go hand in. Racism and sexism go hand in hand.
Right.
They're
So
equal.
white men and white women figured out very early on, if my wife applies for the business license, I will be treated as part of affirmative action.
Right.
And I will have a preference. That's what people complained about, that white women seem to be using it more than they should, and we're blocking out black women and black men. I'll tell you this interesting story. I was on a phone call with one of my white partners when I was at the law firm, Steptoe and Johnson, and I was doing...
Was this before BET? Yeah.
I was there 5 years before BET, and I was doing communications law, which was basically helping clients get broadcast license, radio, TV, whatever. We would go before the FCC. And the FCC had preferences, affirmative action. So if you were, during that time, this was early 80s, if you were a black business person and you wanted a TV license, you could get a preference, which meant, okay, let's say they have 4 balls in the lottery.
Yeah.
2 of them would be painted for preference. I don't know how they did it. But anyway, so I was representing this company down in West Virginia and trying to get them a television license. And I was on a call, they didn't have video or Zoom. And I had talked to them a lot, and apparently they didn't know I was black. So I was in the room with my white partner, and the guy's name who owned the business was Koon, Koon. And I was explaining to him how they had no preferences because they were white men.
Yeah.
I was like, you don't have any women, no black folks, you're going to go into the general lottery. You have no preference. And he said, you mean my last name won't get me a preference? Yes, he did. And it took me, I'm like, what's his last name? And I'm like, coon.
Really?
He's making a joke. And he doesn't realize his lawyer is black.
Right.
And the other lawyer, like I said, was a partner. He was white. And I turned all shades of red. I didn't know what to say. And luckily, the partner came to his senses faster than I did. And he said, "No, Bill. And the fact that your lawyer is a black woman won't help you either." And the phone just went silent. And he realized he had told a racist joke in mixed company.
Wow.
But he said, I mean, and that just sticks in my, and I like that partner ever since, because he knew how to handle it. You know, he didn't rant and rave, but he said, no, and the fact that your lawyer is a black woman isn't going to help you either.
In spaces that you've been in, have you dealt with, I'm sure you've dealt with sexism. I made the mistake in a panel discussion with a mixed group of black women and men, and I asked a black woman, I says, do you see it, there's a difference between you being a black woman and
I used to get it.
A woman and black?
Yeah.
It was just like,
I used to get asked that question. They used to always ask me, which one's harder? Right.
And at that point, because the men didn't think to ask a question or even have to worry about asking, or just thought about that question. But I wanted to know, because as a hairdresser and getting into hair texture versus ethnicity, she kind of was like, no, I can't separate the two.
Really?
That's when I understood intersectionality.
Yeah, that's great. You're ahead of your time. I would answer early on, being black is harder. And I actually had a conversation with Hillary Clinton when Barack was running and for president, and she was running. I had decided I was going to support Barack because he called me up and I had supported him for senator. And he said, Deborah, I'm calling all my supporters and I'm thinking about running for president. What do you think? And I said, Barack, that's a very personal decision that you and Michelle should make. And I can't tell you what to do. But if you do run, I will support you. Wholeheartedly. I hung up the phone.
Because you were a Hillary supporter before that.
Right. I hung up the phone and I said, oh, how am I going to explain this to Hillary? Because I have been a Hillary supporter. And Mignon Moore, who worked for Hillary, is a very good friend of mine. She was kind of our go-between. And she said, Hillary wants to have dinner with you and talk about, you know, your support. And I sort of gave Mignon a heads up. I said, well, you know. Well. And so Hillary and I had dinner. And near the end of the dinner, she said, Deborah, I would like your support for to be the next president. And I said, Hillary, you know, I'm a big fan. I said, but I've been black and I've been female all my life. And being black is harder. And Barack Obama called me and asked for my support. And in my mind, he's the first credible black candidate we've had for president. Where he could, where he could actually win, as opposed to this is a protest run. Shirley Chisholm was the first person I ever voted for president.
Oh, really?
But I knew that was a giveaway vote. It was a protest vote. But anyway, and
I
so
mean, Barack, he was. He was an anomaly. I mean, I just like, I loved Al Sharpton for running.
And Jesse Jackson.
And I know why Al Sharpton ran. I love Al Sharpton. A lot of people have their criticisms against him, but I'm like, if he is not going to sound off, which is what is annoying you, if he's not going to sound off about what happens in our community, who would do it?
Right. He was always a big supporter of mine at BET. I'm going to his 70th birthday party next week. In LA.
It is 70th, right?
Next week in LA. Anyway, and I said to Hillary, being black is harder. And so I'm going to have to support Barack. And that was very hard for me to admit to someone I'm not going to vote for. I mean,
that's not.
And
that's
I said, right. And you know, I'm not a political person, but and so she said, Deborah, I really understand. She said, black women in general are really having a problem deciding who to vote for. So she said, I really understand, and I appreciate your honesty. And I said, you know, Hillary, I'll give you money, but my public stance is I'm supporting Barack.
Yeah.
And so we've still been good friends. She was very nice about it. So that was my belief early on. Then the further I got in corporate America, and I worked at a black company, so in a way, race was taken off the table. You know, you didn't have to think, oh, it's, you know, my boss being racist because it's a black company. But I found as I went further along, it's really harder being a woman.
Yes.
That people will accept
black men. Your book is not only your story, but it's BET's story.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant, and I think that as many women that are in your circle, whether it's leading women define your community of black women, brothers, you need to read I Am Debra Lee.
Should I do this?
Yes, you can do this.
My publisher would be mad if I didn't do this. Thank you.
How you talk about what your plans, which was not to paint everything black, but to show the diversity of who we were in a very beautiful way. We are so many different things and so many different versions from this point to that point in our evolution. And, you know, James Cone, famous black theologian who passed away, I have a great story about him. He said in his book, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, regardless of what those people had against gangster rap, and this is coming from The Cross and the Lynching Tree, of James Cone's words. Gangster rap, it was a voice of a community that demanded to be heard. So however fucked up and guttural and terrible you think our communities are, this is the reason why, and we want to be, and we want our stories to be heard, and they're not pretty. A lot of what you think of us is not pretty. I've always loved that. You said change takes time, and you have to be committed to the ride, not just the finish line. And I love that because you had every intentions of changing what BET was before that that church came along, and we're like, you want to get rid of this, that, and the other. Like, give me time, brother.
I just took over.
I love that you didn't show your hand, and you didn't do it for him,
and they didn't protest when Bob was there. So now we got a woman, and we think we can intimidate her. A single woman, because it was just me and my daughter at home at the time, and they're going to protest and bring people and let them know where my house is. And what if one of them's crazy and comes back later? So it's really a huge security issue. But yeah, it takes time, and people have now likened it to, you know, changing the direction of a plane, changing a wheel on a plane when it's flying, or changing the direction of a cruise ship. It was all of that. You know, I had to start at the beginning. And that's not to say before then we didn't care about standards, because we did. And I told,
we're the most critical.
I told the minister that. I said, I have a group of young executives who look at every video. And if we don't like it, or think it's, you know, misogynistic or whatever, we send it back to the label. You can't
take what BET was to so many people. You can't just shut it off just like that.
The last thing Bob Johnson...
Anybody run those networks before?
Last thing Bob Johnson said to me on his way out is, Deborah, don't ruin the business model. Which was inexpensive videos and bringing in the revenue. But, so we had that, you know, I'm a woman, this guy was a man, and being very intimidating, standing outside my house saying, we are not bitches, we are not hoes. You know, it just, I said, if I let him decide what 3 videos I'm going to take off, he'll be back next month with 3 more. And then the guy ends up running for lieutenant governor on a pro-legalized marijuana stand, like 5 years later.
Are you serious?
I was like, and you give me a hard time because of Lil Wayne, and he's talking about little baggage boy. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of that, so much of what I went through in retrospect had to do with me being a woman. When I was at a law firm and worked there the first summer after my first year in law school, it was a firm in Baltimore, and I just happened, I don't know how I saw this, but my first review from a white partner I had done a project for said, great legs.
Damn.
And that was it. That's why I wanted to write the book.
Yeah.
I wanted
right.
young women to know I didn't just appear on BET's
Young
award
women
show
and
one
men,
day.
because
And men.
because men need to have that intellectual insight that women have naturally.
Right.
We don't have it.
Right.
We learn it from our mothers.
Right.
Or we learn it from the women that raised us.
Yeah.
And there's
And
a
that's
lot
the
of dynamics.
feedback I've gotten from men.
It
You know,
has, yeah.
you should make all men read this. I'm so glad I read
It's
it. It's
so
a learning
good.
experience
It
for
really
them.
is.
I had one guy say his daughter was 7. He was going to save it till she became 15. I mean, the feedback has been amazing.
It's not a difficult read.
Right.
It's a beautiful story that you tell.
Oh, thank you. I think we all should write a book. COVID gave me the time to do it.
Yeah.
I was at home for 2 years and I just methodically did it. But I just want women to know, and this was after the Me Too Time's Up thing.
Yeah.
What happened to me was before Me Too Time's
yeah.
Up. So I didn't even have a name for it. And
I know we were having a conversation about a person, and you looked at me across the dinner table, and you were like, "It's not that simple."
yeah.
And it's the second time a woman has looked at me after I had my point of view as a
Right.
man, as a black man,
And that's great.
and looked at me and said,
Yeah. People ask you, well, why'd you stay? Ask me, why'd you stay? Why didn't you leave? You know, when you know,
It ain't that easy.
You were in this relationship and you wanted out. Why didn't you? Well, first of all, I knew if I left,
Yeah.
I was leaving my career
Yeah.
behind.
Right.
Because,
right.
you know,
Something you built.
right, my boss would have never given me a review again,
Right.
and everyone associated me with BET and with,
And you know how this society
Yeah.
works in terms of once you open your mouth, you get pegged as being this thing.
yeah. And some people say, well, why did you have to tell that story? I didn't have to, but one, I wanted to write a book. And if I didn't tell that story, I would have been totally criticized. Well, you didn't tell about your relationship with Bob Johnson.
Yeah.
And then
But you know what?
I was
Men-
willing to take the criticism.
Right.
And I tried to tell it in as honest a way as I could. I tried not
Tell
to
it in a
make
good way.
I try not to make myself the victim.
Yeah.
I don't think of myself as the victim.
Right.
But if I had known some of this before, you know, the relationship started,
Yeah.
I may have been able to react differently.
Right. Well, so here's why I think the criticism comes to women in that position is that men don't believe that women want the same things that they want. I want to be CEO just like you want to be
Right.
CEO. Guess what? And that's where the power and even sexual assault comes into play. Like, you don't think that I want sex just like you
Right.
in the same way, but I'm just keeping my decorum together. Like, I don't think men really get the fact that women want the exact same things that they do.
Yeah.
They just have a little more fucking decorum.
Right.
And are not willing to look stupid and you know
And
and are playing the long game.
Yeah.
And that's the
And
brilliant
I
thing
won't-
about women.
And I won't get into recent events, but recent events have,
Yeah.
have really upset me. You know, things just surprise you.
I can't even imagine.
I
I mean,
can't-
that's the epitome of culture, is having a network for black people.
Yeah.
That's like
And that's why I was always very proud to work there.
Yeah.
Because we could make decisions based on being black.
yeah.
You know, and the audience would come to us, whatever it was, they wanted to see how the black community was related to it. After 9/11, they turned to BET. Now, we didn't have the news capability to report live.
Right.
So we had to take off all our programming, and Viacom had purchased us by this time. So they said, well, you can use, you know, the CBS reporters in our news feed.
Oh, okay.
So we did, and one of the first days we had Dan Rather reporting on BET.
Oh, no kidding.
He said, he ended the story by saying, and this is Dan Rather for BET.
I love it. I love Dan Rathers.
We got so
I've
much
always
criticism. Why does BET have white reporters on? Because we can't afford,
Right.
you know, but he can tell the story, you know, and he identified himself as being with BET. But anyway,
Yes.
there's so many
I love
instances like that our community wanted more from us, and I wanted to give them to them, you know, and it was just impossible.
Where did your love for fashion and design And I say the two because,
Yes.
child, that house in D.C.
I got it from my father and
That's
my
where I got it
mother.
from.
And my mother. Now, my mother was a seamstress. And she
I knew
loved
that.
fashion, but she would make all her clothes.
Right.
My father was the shopper.
Oh, okay.
And he wanted
Same.
nothing better than to go to Bergdorf Goodman or,
Oh,
you know,
really?
yeah, or some fancy store, whatever city we were in. And he loved shopping for me and my sister.
Oh, he did.
When he came back from
I love that.
Korea, when we were in LA, the first thing he bought us were matching camel hair coats and little brown.
He wanted his daughters to be sharp. Shit sharp.
Right, and he wanted to buy what everybody else could buy.
Right.
And he and my mother were so different. My mother was like, I'm not paying that much money for this.
No, but she could make it.
She could make it.
And she could probably make it to the T.
Right.
I mean, in terms
And
of
she would
quality,
open those designer things and say, they didn't even finish the seam.
Right,
Look at
right.
this. It wasn't until later in her life I would give her gift certificates to Saks Fifth Avenue, which was right across the street from her house in Maryland. And she would finally give in and go by herself. Yeah. But so I learned to sew early.
Oh, you
and
did?
so during high school and college,
Did you make all your stuff?
I made all my stuff.
I
And that's
had to
why
add
I
that
wanted
way.
to be a fashion designer.
Oh, okay.
You know, I was like, I can do this.
Yeah, you were doing you were thinking about doing some bags too.
Right. I designed some. I got to pull them back out now that I left.
I saw a couple of them for women in business.
Yeah.
And what about interior?
The same. They
I wish
both
we had a
like.
picture of your house in D.C.
Yeah, I do
love
too.
that house.
But our house in Greensboro, a very modest house, was outfitted in Scandinavian.
Oh, really?
furniture
No.
Because we lived in Germany, and my
Oh, of
dad
course.
went to Denmark
Right.
and bought a house full of. Before Scan, remember that store? Scan.
Yes.
Was popular. It was popular in the South. I don't know
okay.
if it went. But and I can't remember what kind of art we had on the wall because you know I'm a big art person
Yes.
too. All I can remember is when my dad was in Korea, he had portraits of all of us made
Oh, nice.
from photographs. So we had big, you know, beautiful
Where are they?
portraits. I think I have them in storage somewhere.
Oh, okay. You need.
And I had pigtails like this, and my dad had on his arms.
I bet they're so cool. You have to get them out.
Yeah, they were cool. So it kind of came from all, and then, you know, my sister was in fashion and that exposed me more.
Yeah.
And I was always into it. In college one time, I painted my room yellow. Just because I didn't like the white wall.
Right.
So I was always, when I was in law school, we had a snowstorm and I reupholstered a couch. So I've always been very particular about the way I live. Someone said I'm a nester, that I work real hard to get my home perfect.
Same here.
And then I want to stay there. You know what? I love so many things about our relationship, but one of the things I love is when you just send me a picture of an interior.
Oh yeah.
And just like this, I like this, and I'm like, oh, I like it too.
Finishes. Do you miss your apartment here?
I do. And I had just finished decorating that when COVID hit.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it for 2 years, and I sold it without even coming back. But so I told my therapist, I said, I'm finished my house, and I built a gym. And I said, now I'm getting antsy. And he said, we're going to work on that together. He's like, you're not moving this time.
Why don't you, everyone's thinking about finding someplace out of the country.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that too.
Well, thank you for coming
this was
and
so
talking
much
to
fun.
me. And guess who's in my chair today? It was Debra Lee. And please go get I am Debra Lee. Man,
Amazon,
woman, whoever you are.
Audio.
I love Audible.
Bookstores
myself.
near you. People say the Audible version is like having a glass of wine with me.